best of the best kind of shift in for that one. So we've got a lot to break down. We're certainly going to focus on that. I want to see who you come up with. That's always an adventure in itself. I'm going to just throw out a couple quick ones, Josh, if I can, before we get to the classic. So there's a bunch of races. If you want the full card, obviously that's one of the many reasons you want to get inside the ropes at Awesemo. I'll be in our Discord. We'll be having some fun. There are a couple heavy favorites in some of these races that I think are warranted. The Filly and Mare Sprint, Gamine, she's unstoppable. I bet that she goes off less than even money. She should just dominate. She's too fast. I'm going to leave it at that. I don't think we need to get too technical there. And then in the distaff, Latruska, I think he won't be even money, maybe a little more. He's going to be the favorite, though. Again, very warranted. I thought there was a chance that we might see him in Classic and whatnot. Just simply too good. So those are two very popular choices. But like we talk about in the DFS side, when we talk about the betting side, you don't need crazy plays at every position. You don't need crazy exotics on every card. These are two linchpins of exotics. I think they both win pretty comfortably. And then you can take some shots on these other races. So enough of that. I know why the people are here. They're here for TVG's great promo. But the second reason they're here is to hear...
I can hear Ross in the back. Betty. Is that right? Really? Do we have breeders before lock on the DFS channel?
Live before gate.
Yes. Oh, man, Ross would be all over that. All right. Happy Friday. Welcome to week 9 in the NFL. You've made it. We've made it. It's the Awesemo Fantasy Football Show on the Awesemo Fantasy Football Channel. We appreciate everybody hanging with us for the next hour. It's myself, Tara, and Matt. Chris is producing. And, of course, everything here powered by Yahoo. We'll tell you all about those 2 great links below where you have $10 free just to mess around with and 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. All right, we're here. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here, and it is the beginning of week 9, where we had last night we'll talk about for sure, but we have pretty big news when it comes from both real life and DFS. No, we're not going to break word by word or phrase by phrase down on the Aaron Rodgers interview. Trust me, that more about what happened with Odell Beckham Jr., but we just have to figure out how everybody is, how Tara's doing, how Sapoka's doing. Everybody okay, at least from a DFS or fantasy football standpoint, Tara, maybe not so much from a health standpoint.
Yeah, under the weather. From a football standpoint, okay-ish. I mean, this was a wild week. I felt like my notifications on my phone, on every single app, were going off just constantly, just wild.
Because of injury, the news, right, Matt? It's crazy.
That's very well said. I'm paraphrasing another analyst here, but go home, NFL news cycle. You're drunk. I don't know what else to say. A lot of serious stuff that we don't have to get into, but also some crazy changing of some teams and changing of some big name personnel, and also some injuries we got to break down.
Sure.
There's a lot to get into for sure.
But you're right. I think from the bigger picture, which is now clearly the Rodgers news, what happened with Henry Ruggs, off the field stuff that is going to be more of a conversation than just football. But to encapsulate the past week, Odell Beckham Jr. getting failure to be traded and then getting released into the open market, assuming he'll clear these waivers with the restructured deal, isn't even on the radar compared to the other 2 stories here. That's how crazy and wild of a week it's been. But we'll talk about it, and we'll take questions, start sits, of course, coming in to the weekend here for both Matt and Tara. But let's look at this, and let's start with Beckham himself. I mean, if you are someone who has rostered Odell Beckham Jr., still having him on your team this year, this is probably the best news since you drafting him, I would imagine, right? And Tara, we could start with you. Matt, I know you have thoughts on this as well, but just kind of the big picture of it. this is what you've been waiting for. Free Beckham from that Stefanski offense.
Yeah, I was not bold enough to take him in redraft, but I do have him in Dynasty. And you feel terrible putting him into your lineup because you want to, because it's Odell, but you know that it's just not going to be a good situation. And obviously, this is crazy. It is the best case scenario. He can go somewhere else, hopefully connect with a better quarterback. No offense to Baker. He's injured. It's just not a good situation. And if he can just connect with a different team, I think we could see that kind of situation when you have a star wide receiver go find a new environment, get more comfortable. Maybe things start to fall in place for him. So yeah, oddly enough, getting released from the Browns is probably best case scenario for him.
I think that's really my take as well. This probably is the first time in NFL history an REM song has gotten someone released from a team. But here, Everybody Hurts, the Instagram video that his dad posted, eventually gets Odell Beckham his way out of Cleveland. Yeah, I mean, he hasn't had an 100-yard game since 2019. He's averaging 6.9 fantasy points per game right now. And you picked him in the middle rounds of your fantasy draft. You're feeling pretty bad about that right now. So the idea that he could have a QB upgrade is obviously more exciting than the status quo. That's really how I feel right now. We can speculate a lot on what's going to happen from here. He essentially gets to choose his team. I'm no cap expert, but it does seem like they were spending the last day or two restructuring his contract so that he would pass through waivers, thus allowing him to choose his own team. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I assume that he'll sort of have his pick of a couple teams here. And yeah, I do think there are quarterbacks better equipped to handle Odell Beckham's skill set right now in 2021. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah, and if you're Beckham, right, aren't you wanting to go as far away from the quarterback scenario that you just left? No more Bakers. And again, it's not like he's awful, but he has a ceiling. And you would want, if you have your choice now, I would imagine you would want to go with somebody where, even if it's not, let's say, Tom Brady, but if you could work your way into the Rams, if you could work your way into the Raiders, if you could work your way into a scenario where the quarterback is going to drop back and launch the football, you now have at least that freedom to exhale in an offense, I would think. And that's the beauty of this. And granted, we'll have to wait, Tara, and all and see where he goes, but that's kind of what all three of us were talking about ahead of time with Odell, which is he's going to have a choice. It's going to be the anti-Mayfield as far as a quarterback is concerned. And Matt mentioned how he struggled with the lack of a 100-yard game. I wouldn't be surprised if he went to any of these teams that had a $150 his first game.
Wow, that's bold.
Well, wait until you hear my 30-plus performer, if you want to know bold.
Well, it's funny. You mentioned the Raiders. I mean, obviously, Odell's a big play guy. They lost a big play guy. So it does seem like that's a perfect place where he can fit. I think that's what he needs. As much as not me, I didn't make fun of Eli. He's actually my favorite Manning, just putting that out there. But as much as people made fun of Eli Manning, he was capable of utilizing Odell as that big play performer. And I think that's what he needs to get back to, somebody that's got that kind of arm to get out there in that kind of offense and utilize him as that down the field guy.
Yeah. There are only 10 teams right now with $10 million in cap space right now. And I don't know if that he's going to command somewhere in the $8 to $10 million range, which is where we see wide receivers who are still on the up and up, but take that 1 year prove it deal.
Right.
He may be at a level below that right now. It's hard to tell where the NFL in general sees him. But just looking at, this top 10 list, number one right now, the New York Giants. And I think no, I'm joking. We won't.
Wait a second.
There are a lot of teams that, I'm sorry, guys, but they got a lot of cap space because they don't have a great quarterback situation. There are only a few where that isn't the case. Number 6 and number 7 on that list, the Seattle Seahawks and Los Angeles Chargers. I don't know if they're in the business of finding a wide receiver. You're not hearing their names all over the media sphere yet, but boy, those are situations where I have a ton of confidence, well, when Wilson comes back, that quarterback would be able to find Beckham. The other dark horse here, I could see a situation where he goes to a team like Carolina that's struggling, but, that pays him a lot of money. There are only 5 teams right now with 12 or more in cap space, and we could see one team shell out, thinking thinking he's more like his 2018 or 19 self.
Yeah,
Just don't think that's the most probable.
Right. And I think that, to your point about it not being the most probable, is there's going to be that middle ground, that Venn diagram, even if you find that middle where he's able to go and compete and put up numbers, but really show. And you mentioned the show me deal. I saw it here with Alshon in Philadelphia. This is where I think he is going to be devalued this point right now in this initial. But if he comes out and he balls, and this is again back to going to a place that has a quarterback that allows him to, if he goes out and he balls, we may see heavy money come his way at the end of this season. So it's the risk reward. You don't take the 12 million right now. Maybe you take the 6 million, but that sets you up for X amount more in the offseason.
Yeah, I think that makes a whole lot of sense.
Okay. Now let's look at this with Cleveland. If you're already locked into Landry, if you're a Njoku, if you're already locked in to somebody, then you've been kind of dealing and maneuvering through this minefield as is, with Baker Mayfield up and down, and now you have at least Odell out. So that does a little bit more as far as the person that you're locked into. Matt, let me throw it back at you, Tara, as well here. But let's start with how appealing people are streaming positions, wide receiver, maybe even the tight end spot. If you need that position with Cleveland, like if you are going to the wire right now and trying to pick up somebody at the wide receiver or tight end position, where does Cleveland even land now? Because we've seen Odell out.
Yeah, it's still not super exciting outside of the running backs. We know what this team is built around. Not to say it's impossible that Baker Mayfield and his receiving core can't put up big games. We've certainly seen it over the last 2 seasons, but I still have Jarvis Landry outside my top 30 wide receivers rest of the season. I have Donovan Peoples-Jones in the wide receiver 50 to 55 range. You know, these are players that if you need to start them in a bye week pinch in a decent matchup, I'm fine with it, but you're not thrilled about starting these players. I will say that Donovan Peoples-Jones sort of has that deep ball skill set that if you're talking about a 1-for-1 positional replacement, I think he's probably the place to look. He is a bit injured right now, but I guess that is sort of the flyer take that you want to take in this offense. They're still using 3 tight ends a lot, and so that makes me dislike all 3, to be completely honest.
Go ahead, Sarah. I'm sorry. You looked like you were going to jump in.
Yeah, you know, for me, I agree pretty much 100%. I think the only one that's really permanently rosterable in theory is just Landry, just based off the amount of targets that he'll have. Aside from that, the only issue that I have is that we could go to the wire and we can get Donovan Peoples-Jones, and he's someone that you can keep on your bench. There's just not a reality in which you can confidently roll him out into your starting lineup. This is still a run first team. This is still a team that's going to be led by Nick Chubb. We still have, Hunt that's on IR, and we've got Darnell Johnson that's coming in and, filling a little bit of that running role. But I just don't think outside of Landry, there's anyone who is someone that you can rely on. But I am going and I am getting Donovan Peoples-Jones. I'm not putting him into my starting lineup at this point.
All right, we have a couple of questions we're going to hit on the chat. Start sits here. Hit that thumbs up button, please, as you're hanging with us. And a reminder is you see below the video, we have 2 links for you for Yahoo. You can just claim $10 free. And below that, if you're new, we're going to give you 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum upon your first deposit and contest entry. So let's look at last night briefly, and then we'll look at all these injuries. Aaron Rodgers, Derrick Henry, big names to James Robinson, even Devonte Parker, the mess that continues down in Miami. Last night, usual suspects for the Colts not going anywhere. Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor. I'm sure Carson Wentz, if people are still streaming him, if he's unrostered in Yahoo leagues, probably got picked up a little bit more. But, throwing it back with you, Tara, and then to Matt here, Zach Pascal, Hines, anybody else that maybe isn't on the immediate radar bump up anything for you, or do you kind of attribute it to, no offense to them, but it's kind of just the Jets?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we keep wanting this tight end position to happen for somebody. In theory, it should. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but they're taking literally 5 or 6 targets and splitting them between people in the most ineffective way. So it ends up being whichever one of them gets a touchdown. And, finally, it's not Mo Alley-Cox, who for a couple weeks in a row now is just not performing as he was before with those touchdowns. So outside of that, we've got Zach Pascal, who is the number 2 receiver as long as T.Y. Hilton is out. Michael Pittman, who is showing that, he can theoretically be a wide receiver 1. And outside of that, I really don't think there's anywhere that we're looking to within this offense. It was good to see Nyheim Hines come to life. I guess they really were waiting to try and showcase Marlon Mack and try and get him potentially traded. I guess no one bought. And, and so now we've got Nyheim Hines. And, seeing what, unfortunately, I played against him in multiple leagues. So that wasn't fantastic for me from that perspective. But it's good to see that he's getting back involved in this offense and can be fantasy relevant.
If it makes you feel any better, I played a bunch of his under props. So we're in similar boats. We both lost money technically. So
yes.
Yeah, it was really nice to see Nyheim Hines, and actually spot started him in a few of my leagues, not against Tara, but it did go pretty well for me last night. But yeah, it's obvious that Nyheim Hines has a role that is predefined and can grow or shrink based on the game script here. And this was an ideal game script to get both running backs involved. Now, one thing I will say, if Marlon Mack was a bench stash of yours going into this week because maybe you thought he was going to be dealt at the deadline, I'm not necessarily saying he's completely valueless at this point, because Jonathan Taylor is one of those clear-cut running back ones that we want to have their direct backup to. And I don't believe that Nyheim Hines will take over that full role if there is some sort of unfortunate injury to Jonathan Taylor, which we don't want at all. Jonathan Taylor did briefly leave this game with a cut on his leg, but they just went to Hines since the game was pretty much put away here. That is just one thing I want to say. Like, I don't think Marlon Mack is an unrosterable player at this point. You're just going to get zeros unless there is some sort of injury. That's just the way it goes with some of these handcuffed running backs. In the passing game, we saw 10 different receivers catch a pass, which is the way the Colts want to play offensively. They want to spread the ball around. They do want Michael Pittman to be their wide receiver 1, but 565 and 1, which is essentially what he had last night, is exactly the way they're going to do it most weeks. Zach Pascal, 4 for 58 on 7 targets, and Nyheim Hines, 4 for 34 on 6 targets. That's essentially how they want to do it, with those auxiliary pieces mixing in and out. That's why we have volatility from those tight ends, like Tara was saying, because sometimes they're just not part of that secondary group. Like they didn't have to be last night. All in all, this is the ideal form of the Colts offense. This is exactly what they want to be on a week in, week out basis. So from that perspective, it was fun to see.
So let me just twist it right back on the Jets before we look at some pretty big injuries. Of course, Aaron Rodgers, Derrick Henry, some big names there. At the top, hit that thumbs up button, please, and subscribe if you haven't already. The real issue now is the quarterback spot. Even you could argue with Zach Wilson coming back and how much that complicates things. I don't think anything changed with Carter and even Johnson as far as their role and their their volume. And I'm hesitant to buy into Elijah Moore or even Cole as a sneaky option, deeper option, because it was 45-10 at one point, and the Colts just stopped playing defense. So I guess that's where I'm looking at it here, where nothing really changed as far as my perception of the Jets and roles and operation of the Jets offense. Does that make sense, Tara, Matt? Does that kind of make sense to you? Or maybe you saw something that you think we can build on even with the instability at the quarterback position?
I think I maybe feel a little bit different on Elijah Moore than you. And the difference in it for me is the consistency in targets over the past 3 weeks. There hasn't been a consistency in snap count, but again, there's a lot of factors that go into that. They've been spreading the ball around, a lot of mouths to be able to feed, ironically, within that offense. But yeah, 3 weeks in a row, 6 targets, 8 targets this week. So I'm feeling more confident that he does have a very specific role in this offense. It'll be interesting to see exactly what happens when Zach Wilson comes back, because we had Mike White, then we saw Johnson come in as well. And so it's kind of interesting to see, are these changes they've made within the offense to fit within these new 2 quarterbacks? And they're going to be able to replicate this type of production when Zach Wilson comes back? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if there's some kind of adjustments that they make and if Zach Wilson can have a more positive impact within this offense moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's very, very well said. The only thing I would add is, are we really going back to Zach Wilson? Because all we've seen is good quarterback play from Mike White. And it was really unfortunate, in my opinion, that we didn't get to see a full game of his, because we actually might have had a more competitive game. Although the Jets defense was like, hold my beer, we're losing this for us all day, all
Yes.
game long anyway.
Yes.
But the one thing I'm noticing, Carson Wentz had a fantastic game, 272, 3 touchdowns, still had a QBR of 91.9. Mike White's QBR on 11 passes, 90.8. He was right there with Wentz in terms of efficiency, 7 for 11 for 95 yards and a score to the aforementioned Moore. I was excited to see him involved early. That is Moore. And, yes, you feel like that second touchdown's a little garbage timey. How can you factor that in all the way? But still, just as Tara said, this is the player you want to see what you can get out of. How much do you value the wide receiver position in the 2022 draft? For the Jets, that should matter based on how well Elijah Moore shows out the rest of the season. I personally believe that Moore can be a wide receiver one, a top 12 wide receiver in this league if given enough opportunity. It was really great to see that ceiling performance because I felt like it was there.
So let me just follow up on that. And I think you both raise an interesting point here about what happens with Wilson to what we've seen with White to even Johnson in garbage time, because it's not like the Jets are going to be in tight football games moving forward, especially if there's a shift in the quarterback spot. So Johnson throwing for over 300 yards, like not everybody comes back when you're down 45-10. So Johnson throwing for 300 yards, Mike White 400 the previous week to the 95 before he goes down. It's almost like, and this is where I'll concede the point, it's almost like moving forward, I know the Jets aren't going to be in many football games. And now I've seen two quarterbacks not named Wilson be able to capitalize either in the small opportunity or chance that they are winning a game, or the majority of which where they're going to be down. Johnson can at least throw the football. So there is something to that.
Yeah, it's such a strange situation, because if it had just been Mike White, I would have said, okay, maybe there's something here. Maybe, Mike White was able to come in, maybe the offense fits him a little bit better. But Josh Johnson coming in and being able to have that type of volume again makes me kind of ponder and say, when Zach Wilson went down, did they make some kind of adjustments and say, we're going to lean more on this, we're going to push more that way, we're going to do this with the receivers and just more make the offense better optimized? And maybe they just need to go back to that and see if Zach Wilson can perform within that. I don't know. I find it hard to believe that those guys, now granted, Josh Johnson is a veteran. He's been in the league for a long time. So that's a little bit different of a situation, but still, I don't know. It just seems a little bit odd that all of a sudden this offense is kicking, even in garbage time.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. It's great. All right, let's go from one quarterback to another. Aaron Rodgers is out. Everybody is fully aware and caught up with the Aaron Rodgers saga, I'm sure. Let's look at it from, all right, where else do you go? We've seen some injuries around the NFL. We just talked about what's going on with the Jets, clearly in New Orleans. There are guys that are now in that weren't there from the jump or were never really expected to be in. So, Matt, let's start with you, Tara, as well, and look at some options for people that were relying on Aaron Rodgers and probably didn't think before this week, outside of a bye week, that they would have to race and replace. And look, a lot of times too, and this is just me, so I'm sure other people go through this as well, where you always have, what is it called, where you're looking at something and, it's like envy, right? You always have envy in the wire, like, or you're always looking and thinking, it's the opposite of a real fan where the backup quarterback is the best friend. In this case, it's always like, oh, really? That's my backup. I'm stuck with this. And you're always thinking you can do better out there. So let's look at that. Let's look at an opportunity. And I would just say, if someone like Wentz, for example, especially after last night, is still unrostered in your league and you could go out and get him, that would be a perfect opportunity to kind of pivot away. So I'll take an easy one off the table there for you, Matt.
Yeah, well, let's say you need somebody for this week with Aaron Rodgers out this week. I think you could do much, much worse than a player like Tua Tagovailoa. I don't know if he's going to be on waiver wires, but in one quarterback leagues, he very well may be playing the Houston Texans this week, who are 25th in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed and 26th in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to entire offenses. So they're bad against quarterbacks and the rest of the skill positions. That's definitely a player I would look to. The other really don't appeal as much, but I would say Daniel Jones maybe against Las Vegas. They're kind of middle of the road in terms of defensive metrics, right about league average in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. And there's that rushing floor and ceiling we can get from Jones. The thing with Jones is it can go downhill really fast, especially with the injuries they're dealing with in New York.
For me, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. Tua is definitely the one for me. I will say that someone that you could maybe rely on if you had to go another direction would be Tyrod Taylor. He's going to start this week. And if we look back to week 1 against Jacksonville, he did very well. The next week, he was well right up until he got injured in the game. If there's someone that you have to pivot to, I think he's a good option. I think it's a solid matchup again. Houston is playing Miami, who, quite frankly, on defense has not been fantastic. And we mentioned Tua, obviously. So from that perspective, we do think that this is a game where there could be a ton of volume coming from the Miami side against that Houston defense. It makes sense that Tyrod Taylor would be likely to match that going on the back end. So I do think that even coming off of this injury, it sounds like they've held him out enough to where they're bringing him in now. They feel confident. He's comfortable. I would not anticipate that this is a situation where you need to worry about the injury. And I would be okay with maybe looking at him as a spot start. In addition to that, I will say you don't have to go away from the Packers. You maybe can take a risk and go with Jordan Love.
Yes.
Do not forget that, he did technically prepare as the Packers QB1 in the offseason. He's very familiar with this offense from the position of leading the team. So, and he's got fantastic weapons. He's got Aaron Jones. He's got Devonte Adams that's going to come back in here. So I do think that this is a situation where playing against the Kansas City team where he's put into the best situation to maybe not be able to put up Aaron Rodgers numbers, but he's put in the best situation to be able to try to get there. So he's not the worst pivot in the world for me.
I'm telling you, he may come back in the show a little bit later. You never know, Matt. Jordan Love, the love for love. You never know. I see you shaking your head. I know there are better options out there, but I have to agree with Tara where you have the matchup more so than anything else. How can you deny how shitty the Chiefs are on defense?
The Chiefs defense if they can make Jordan Love look like a quarterback one, then I might have to reevaluate everything. Yes, I know they're bad, but they would be that bad if that really occurs. I like the call a lot, actually.
Yeah. So I will say Daniel Jones last week despite the fact that he had literally no weapons as they all disappeared throughout the game, still had a fairly decent game against Kansas City. So I do think that this is a situation where we're going to see a very usable game out of Jordan Love. If it was another team, you might want to sit there and say, I'm not going to take that risk, but it's literally the perfect opportunity.
It's all about the matchup. I love it. In the chat here, XMumbo7, start AJ Dillon. So let's look at that. I'm sure both of you have thoughts and just how much you're going to get to Dillon or should be looking at Dillon as far as a starter here, knowing, of course, that there's going to be more of a reliance on the run. We would just think that they would rely a little bit more on the run. But again, it's the Chiefs. So Tara and Matt, if you wanted to start there, what is the advice with someone like AJ Dillon, where we've already seen him involved in this offense, but now it's the Rodgers less factor as well?
Yeah. So game script is a problem here, right?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I apologize.
No,
game
go
script
ahead,
is
Matt.
a problem here because the Chiefs, yes, they had a rough month of October, but we know what their offensive potential is. And so if they get up by multiple scores, as we saw with the Jets last night, there's nothing you can do with a game plan other than pass the ball. That said, the way I would handle a situation with Aaron Rodgers being out, but Devonte Adams back in, is I would try to get 20 to 25 touches for Aaron Jones, 5 to 15 looks for Devonte Adams. You can't control everything because they might double cover him. And then the rest, maybe 15 or more touches, might go to AJ Dillon. And we saw it last week, 16 carries for 78 yards, including 4 in the red zone in a very, very competitive game. This wasn't like a blowout or something. This was the Cardinals last week in a game that came down to the wire. There is some volatility there. Like, he had 5 total opportunities and managed negative fantasy points the week before. But, we've already seen a 17-point fantasy performance out of Dillon this year. So absolutely, in a game where they're going to be forced to change the game plan, you can start him in a spot start situation this week.
All right, one more I see. We'll get back to the injuries and then hit some sneaky starts, our 30-plus point performers here as well. Kicks plugs, D. Harris or D. Williams? Terry, you want to start there? Oh, wait. Did we didn't hear you on this one, too. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
On Dillon. I apologize.
No problem at
why
all.
don't you give us thoughts on Dillon and then kick off with the Harris or Williams question?
Yes. So on Dillon, I don't think it's going to be the same exact performance from last week, just because that was a weird situation where they had to rely on Dillon on the ground and rely a little bit on through the air with Aaron Jones, with the whole situation of not having Devonte Adams, MVS, and Alan Lazard. But I will say, I was literally just looking at the waivers trying to figure out, what running backs are left. Where can you pivot to? And aside from Carlos Hyde, in the event that James Robinson doesn't play, there's not a lot of good places to pivot. So this is one where I would take the risk and go with AJ Dillon and hope that maybe they do a little bit more volume on the ground and he gets a little bit more involved, because there's literally just not a lot of great situations out there on the waivers. And in terms of the picking,
Harris
it's going to be
Williams.
Harris or Williams. It would be Williams for me. I think, the Derek Gore thing is fun. Potentially a little maybe DFS play if you want to get a little low balling, a little bit risky. But for me, Darrell Williams is still the lead back in that offense while CEH is out. Yeah, Kansas City is probably still going to involve Derek Gore just because they're not one to typically rely specifically on one running back. But in my opinion, I would still go with Darrell Williams. I think he's still going to have a decent amount of volume. Green Bay's defense has improved, but not enough to the point where I'm fading running backs against them. So I would still be sticking with Williams.
Gosh, it's razor thin for me. I literally look at the projections and they're within a half a fantasy point right now in PPR leagues. I think one thing you could say is that Damian Harris is a favorite this week, and usually you want to play the type of running back that Harris is when the Patriots are favored in a game, but they're not favored by so much that the game script could go completely awry, even if it is the Carolina Panthers and people are down on them right now. So I do actually agree with you, Tara. I think I'm going to go with the quote unquote safety of Darrell Williams just based on the offense he's in. There's no way around saying the Kansas City Chiefs offense is off. It is turnover prone currently, but there are also a lot of positive underlying metrics where you want the starting running back on that team. They're both RB2s in fantasy. They're flexible in your lineups this week, but if you have to choose one, it's Williams.
All right, I'm going to take that same phrase and put your feet to the fire here, both of y'all here, okay? You can only choose one. You need a running back, but you could only choose one. 77% rostered is McNichols across Yahoo. 63% is all-day AP. Tara, Matt, Tara, you can start. You can only choose one. I guess I would take Peterson just on the strength of probably the narrative that we built earlier in the week about he ain't coming back unless he knows he's getting the football. And I know he's not in like immediate game shape, but that's me. If you could only choose one, and you have to choose one, McNichols or Peterson?
It sounds like Adrian Peterson might actually be game ready for the way they're speaking about him. Like so impressed with the way he is right now. But it's the matchup. It's the Rams. They're very hard to run against. And from that perspective, I have to go with the one that's going to probably be catching the ball. So I would go with McNichols. But, moving forward, Adrian Peterson. But just in this one instance, I think McNichols has the upside.
I worry that McNichols just keeps his role, and they just want 3.5 to 3.9 yards and a cloud of dust until Adrian Peterson can't do it anymore. I agree with you. I think that the game script argument is completely legitimate. I just think the volume might ultimately be double what McNichols gets. And so all we need for him is to fall into the end zone, and he has that better score. I think in a full PPR league, when we don't know what's going on and you had to choose one, McNichols may be my choice. But I think the 2 touchdown ceiling is closer to Peterson. So it's really tough. And I think half PPR and below, I'd lean Peterson.
No, it makes sense. It definitely makes sense. All right, let's keep it moving here with the injuries, and I'm gonna combine two because let's just assume here that Kyler Murray is out. Now it's Hopkins, AJ Green. They're both questionable as well. But for the purposes of this conversation, at the very least, let's assume he's out. We also know that the Saints are looking to start Trevor Simeon as a result of what happened with Jameis Winston. So I guess first and foremost, it's the immediate connection here, which is you're rostering Kyler Murray. You were able to pick up Trevor Simeon. Are you moving to Matt? Are you moving to Simeon if he's your backup for Murray and Murray's out? Or are you looking to stream what probably would be a better option out there if you could find it? Or maybe there's something. Maybe there's something in the Sean Payton, Trevor Simeon connection that you're looking to mine and be ahead of the curve and keep him.
Yeah, you know what's really tough about that, Aton, is that the Arizona game, where they've already announced that Hopkins and Murray are going to be game time decisions, that's a late game. That's an afternoon game. And Trevor Simeon and the Saints play at 1 p.m. on Sunday. So you're ultimately going to have to make a decision with incomplete information here. I think that means that Jordan Love actually becomes a more appealing option because you have that optionality and you get that information later. You have the ability to start Kyler, but if you can't, you can pivot away to Jordan Love. By the way, you have to remember that some have a 4:05 p.m. Eastern start and some 4:25. Luckily, both Green Bay, Kansas City, and Arizona, San Francisco have 4:25 starts. I think, just ignoring the projection differentials between these players, I think Jordan Love, for a person who is dealing with a Murray injury, actually makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, I can't add anything else because that was exactly my thought process. It's perfect. Jordan Love is your exact pivot for that timing. So, yeah, if Kyler Murray can't go, hold off, wait. If he goes, you have to start him because it's Kyler Murray. But if he can't, you can pivot to Jordan Love.
Hopefully we get that Schefter tweet at, midnight Eastern that says, Kyler Murray nursing a ankle injury is expected to play today. And then we're like, yes, okay, we're good to go.
Yeah, that's true. No, that would make life insanely easier by all means. Hopkins is out. AJ Green is out. I know you mentioned that they're game time decisions. So if they're rolling, then you pretty much like D-Hop, if he's out there, you're playing him. AJ Green, I don't know to a lesser extent, but clearly Kirk is going to benefit the most if these two guys are out. But another guy who I'm sure is not that highly rostered, I would bet at least, is not that highly rostered. He's got big play and sign him all day, and that's Rondale Moore. I imagine how much he bumps up, mainly because I would think, Tara, that realistically speaking, you have a much easier pathway to getting Rondale Moore off the waiver wire than you would Christian Kirk, who's probably already rostered in most leagues.
Yep, exactly. That is the exact thought process. If you can't pivot to Kirk because he's already picked up or already rostered, Rondale Moore. The only thing that seems to be holding Rondale Moore back, it's not talent. It's literally just opportunity because there's just way too much. I mean, he's literally like the fifth option sitting there behind DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Green, Christian Kirk, Zach Ertz, and then add in there together as well, Chase Edmonds. I mean, it's just way too much and he just doesn't get the opportunity. So this is literally the perfect time to take a chance on him.
Yep. We've seen him at a 53.9% route participation rate over the course of the season. That's 84th among wide receivers.
Wow.
That's why he's volatile. He's obviously shown a tremendous amount with the ball in his hands. Spoiler alert, we're going to hear more about him later in the show. But yeah, absolutely. The short area targets for the Cardinals make a lot of sense, especially if they're playing a backup quarterback and they're downfield threats. The problem is, are they going to be able to stretch the field, get over the top so that they can keep that defense honest for San Francisco?
So let's flip it. Let's assume that they do play. Again, DeAndre Hopkins is going to be bulletproof to the circumstances unless he's out there with one leg. But even then, you're probably going to play him more often than not. AJ Green, if you were in a position where you were relying on AJ Green as, your third wideout or, in the flex spot, what have you, what happens now? Because he is playing through injury and he's in a little bit of a better situation than someone like Rondale Moore. And Matt, I'll throw it back to you first and Tara, but he's also in this large group of a lot of mouths to feed, and now you have to add the Q tag that he's playing through. So is there now a move to almost treat it like he's not playing as a whole, or can you ride through this because of the matchup, which is not easy, by the way, with the San Francisco 49ers? What are you doing with AJ Green if he's playing and he's not someone that is your wide receiver, hopefully at least your wide receiver 1 or 2?
Yeah, it's tough. He's on the COVID list, right? So he has to test negative twice in order to be eligible for the game. So it's sort of like it's actually different than an injury, right? Because it
Correct.
means that he's either in and healthy or all the way out, and you know that going in. So in a way, I don't mind actually starting AJ Green if he is the quote unquote wide receiver 1 on Sunday afternoon if Hopkins sits. The San Francisco 49ers are by all means a decent defense, but in that metric I keep mentioning, schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, they're actually slightly below average
Really? Okay.
compared to other defenses, and they're more exploitable via the pass than via the running game. So I'm fine taking a chance on Arizona receiving options, hence my sneaky start. Green would absolutely be on that list, and we can't forget about Zach Ertz too. Has already shown some pretty high upside, even just being on that team for a few weeks at this point.
Yeah, for me, the only thing that I'm worried about is that unfortunately, because he is on the COVID list, he has not had the ability to practice. So that I think it's a hamstring injury that he has. We have no idea how serious that is or isn't, and he may not know either. So from that perspective, if he does test negative and he is able to play on Sunday, and we really don't know how good that hamstring is actually feeling. I get worried with those hamstrings because we've seen countless players, the Giants receivers obviously being one of them, come in and they're good to go with the hamstring, and lo and behold, it gets re-injured because it's so easy to come back in and re-injure those hamstrings. So that would be the only thing I'd be concerned about, and it might pivot somewhere else.
Couple of interesting start sits on the chat here as we hit the weekend. We'll go back a couple of more injury notes, hit the 30 plus and sneaky starts, I'm sure, before we get out of here. AB on the chat. We mentioned Dillon. Gainwell this weekend as well in a half PPR. It's the volatility and the unknown that we continue to bring up with the Philadelphia Eagles backfield. I don't know if either of you have a lean on what Nick Sirianni is going to do with the running game. If you do, please let me know, because I have no idea. But and again, we'll answer as many questions as we possibly can. There's no such thing as a stupid question. I'm proof of that. Dillon or Gainwell, on the surface, I would think just from a known commodity, it would be Dillon, Tara, right? Unless you wanted to take a big risk on Gainwell being the guy.
Yeah, no, it's definitely Dillon. I think we're going to see a repeat situation where Gainwell might not really be involved. So unfortunately, I would definitely be leaning towards Dillon in this situation.
I'll add that Gainwell is the type of player in DFS you could take a chance on in a large field GPP, but in season-long fantasy leagues, that's not the type of player we're going to, right? Because we saw the type of usage for Jordan Howard and Boston Scott that could be a death knell for Kenny Gainwell's value. And at the same time, the guy has a 12-point fantasy performance, a 20-point fantasy performance, and a 14-point fantasy performance. And, he's a rookie, so there's still that just unknown upside there. They're clearly going to use him, but if he's part of a three-headed monster, you got to get a couple things right. Is the game script favoring him, and is he getting those touches that are most valuable? You don't want to do that. So it's you're just not going there in a season-long league. Don't start him.
Skimmer 930. I'll throw it back to you first, Matt, Tara, and then we can get back to the injury timeline as well. It's Bateman or Myers as far as the start sit, and looking at this for the rest of the season. So maybe looking at either a trade or picking up or just moving forward. And everything depends on the matchup when you say rest of the season. So that's kind of the bigger picture of the question.
So I want to say Bateman was absent at the beginning of today's practice or something like that. So I might want to double check on that. But if there's any issues with that, I would lean towards Myers. It's not a bad matchup. Again, the problem with Jacoby Myers is you're just not getting that touchdown production. Targets are there. We just wish that he could find the end zone. So, opposite with Bateman, though, it's a very specific targets, but it's not very high. So I might take a risk with Bateman if he's healthy and there's no issues there. But, if there's even just a little inkling of some kind of issue, I would definitely be leaning towards Jacoby Myers.
I'm going to lean Bateman. If you're talking about rest of season rankings here, I have them so close in my rankings. I'm talking within 4 wide receivers in my rest of season rankings. So, and what we're projecting for them, they both have a lot of unknowns in my opinion. The problem is touchdowns are so valuable in fantasy football, and we know that the New England offense really isn't using wide receivers near the goal line. They have 4 total touchdowns, and so many people have said so many ways about how Jacoby Myers hasn't scored a touchdown. I don't need to go into it further. I guess it's a little bit of me just getting excited about that new shiny first round pick that's out there. But with the rankings so similar, I'm going to go with the unknown upside of Bateman. I totally understand the Myers argument, though, if you go the other way.
So let's look at CeeDee Lamb, and then we'll move into our 30-plus points and sneaky starts. We have to hit a bunch of sneaky starts here as well before we get out. Any more start sits that we see come across the chat, we'll hit on as well. All we ask, hit that thumbs up button. Make sure you're subscribed here to the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel as we continue to build. And then those 2 links below are for you, where you can claim $10 free at Yahoo contest. And if you're a new Yahoo user, you can get 1 free month, as you see Chris putting it up there, of Awesemo Plus Platinum upon your first deposit and paid contest entry. So CeeDee Lamb, and Matt, we'll throw it back and start with you, Tara, as well here, and then we'll move into our projections for who's going to break the slate this weekend. But let's look at it from a standpoint of Lamb, first and foremost, Matt, and then anything else how deep of a concern it is, mispractice on Thursday, if there's a pivot either on the team or simply just in general that you're looking to do anything, if at all, with Lamb.
Yeah, anytime there's a player of Lamb's stature, both within his offense and within fantasy leagues everywhere, that is questionable with a new injury, that's certainly alarming. And the Dallas Cowboys offense being one of the most prolific in the league, even if Lamb isn't producing on a week-to-week basis, which, by the way, he pretty much has been, with Lamb on the field, the offense in general is more explosive. And right now, they've been one of the best offenses in the league, as I said, 4th in expected points added per play. So I do worry about the offense in general taking a hit if Lamb is out. The obvious answer is that Amari Cooper could see more targets. I don't disagree with that, but it doesn't change the fact that Denver's defense is one of the top 5 defenses in the league, and 2, now have less weapons to cover on the field, because Cedric Wilson, as good as he has been in spots, is not replacing CeeDee Lamb 1-for-1 by any means. So I'm not panicking here. I actually think he's got a chance to play still, but boy, with these Cowboys still, I'm looking at it, it's -10 right now, even though Denver is traveling somewhat east to play Dallas. I think that's a trap game right there.
It was down to 9 at one point and jumped back up. Are you looking at concerns with what Matt laid out, Tara, and anything in the backdrop of Dak, who missed last week, still hurt, and that could factor into the offense slowing down as well?
I'm not super concerned about Dak just because he was a game time decision. It sounds like everything is good to go now. I was extremely concerned about CeeDee Lamb, although Mike McCarthy has come out and I think he said, today that he feels a little bit more positively about CeeDee Lamb and his injury. So do keep that in mind, that it might not be a situation where we're automatically saying that right now he's not going to play. I think we're going to need to monitor it because he might be viable on Sunday. And if he's starting, even if there was this injury, I will be playing him. That said, I think who could benefit if he is out is maybe Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz was a disappointment last week. I think he could have a nice bounce back game here if those targets are missing from CeeDee Lamb.
All right, let's look at, this has become one of my favorite parts of the show. I love every part of the show, don't get me wrong, but I look forward to this maybe even more so than everything else, which again, I look forward to everything. Let's look at the 30-plus performer, week 9. I think we 2 straight weeks we've had, or was it 2 weeks, 2 people last week that did it? I thought it was maybe 2 straight weeks, or was it Matt?
Yeah, we had 2 hits last week, Michael Pittman and A.J. Brown, 2 out of 3.
Now we're going for a perfect sweep here, a 3-0 sweep here. All right, Tara, so you kick off.
Yeah, I was the one that didn't hit last week.
I didn't
so,
bring that up. I just said numbers.
No one said it. No one said it.
Oh, but bear with me, you guys. I hope I can get through this without coughing all over the place. But my 30+ point performer this week is Jalen Waddle. There's so many different ways you could go in this offense. I could have said Tua. I think that one is, one that could have hit as well. I think he'll have a huge game. I actually expect a nice game from Myles Gaskin as well. I have him as a 20 and another show as a 20+ point performer, but I'm not bold enough to put Gaskin in that 30+ category. So I went with Jalen Waddle on this one. I thought this was a good option, a nice middle ground. Devonte Parker is unlikely to play on Sunday. He re-injured that hamstring and unfortunately is probably going to be sitting. And then, on top of that, even if Devonte Parker does play, don't let last week's big game by Parker fool you. Waddle and Parker saw the same exact amount of targets, but understandably, Waddle wasn't as productive with them. I think it's because he had Tre'Davious White on him. And, unfortunately, that does make things a little bit more difficult in terms of actually catching the ball when you are the one with him on you. But it really encourages me that despite having that tough matchup, he was still targeted 11 times by Tua. So I think Tua really wants to get the ball to him. Devonte Parker out. I think this is just a perfect storm of a situation against Houston where we're going to see a nice game from Jalen Waddle.
I like it. I like it a lot. Here's the thing that I think can factor in on this, which is it's not just going to be a blowout with what's the kid's name with the long neck already? Davis Mills.
Davis Mills
starting, right? I mean, Tyrod Taylor comes back. Houston can be competitive, right? Not that Miami's in the business of blowing teams out, but that may keep Tua throwing. And remember, Matt mentioned Tua earlier as far as a pivot at the quarterback spot. So I like it. I think it makes sense. Matt?
Yeah, I think that's a great call and much, much bolder than the name I'm about to name here, especially because that game really does have shootout potential with Taylor coming back and both those defenses essentially unable to get off the field. So there's a lot of factors there where there could be a lot of passing and a lot of points scored. One counterintuitive point that I want to make about this next game I'm bringing up, Minnesota and Baltimore, is that both of these teams have identities surrounding their defenses, right? These are two strong defensive teams, defensive-minded coaches who year in and year out have great metrics on defense. Well, guess what? It's not really the case this year. Both of them right around league average and schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed. And one thing we're not seeing is that they're nowhere near the elite level in passing metrics, even if they are somewhat above average in some of the metrics that I'm looking at. And so I think that Justin Jefferson has 30-point potential this week. We've already seen him hit 26.8 fantasy points. Remember, you need 18 PPR points on top of your 2 touchdowns to hit 30 in a game. So there's only a few people who I think can hit it every week, and you need those double-digit targets. And we've already seen 9 or more for Jefferson in 4 out of 8 games this year. The 4 targets last week were an anomaly. I looked at PFF's wide receiver cornerback matchups, and when Jefferson is faced up everywhere except for against Anthony Averett, he has a top 5 matchup among all wide receivers on the week. And Minnesota just gave up 325 and 2 scores to Cooper Rush. We can talk about metrics all we want, but we saw it on the field. A backup quarterback was able to go out and win the game, throwing to their number 1 wide receiver when everyone in the building knew where it was going. So I really think that this game, particularly with a 49.5-point total, is going underrated because usually a 49.5-point total is kind of modest, maybe second tier for the NFL. But this week, when the highest total before Sunday night is 50 points, now 49.5 seems really interesting. So I'm going with the number 1 option on Minnesota, Justin Jefferson, 30. Book it.
Wow. We got to book it at the end of that. This is a man, Tara, who is feeling himself after nailing it last week.
I know. I would feel confident if I was saying Justin Jefferson too. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, it's true. Like, respect for throwing us Waddle. That is awesome. Bold.
I'm just here to lose, guys. I'm just here to lose.
No, it's all good. All right, I'm going to return back to the Jordan Love, and I'll be short and sweet. We talked about him earlier. Tara, you laid it out there as far as how you could stay with Love as a pivot for Rodgers. And the biggest thing for me is, and I know it's cliche at this point, but it's been born out of a reality, which is the Chiefs are bad. The Chiefs are really bad. And I don't think that Matt LaFleur is going to change much. Some of it, and a lot of it probably, is instinct and the ability to have one of the best quarterbacks that's ever played the game. And I'm not suggesting like McNichols or anybody, Adrian Peterson taking over for Derrick Henry, similar scenario, but there's a pathway here. And that's all I need. I just need not even a little bit, but somewhat of an opening for a guy who can throw the football, Adams, Jones, people around him. And my goodness, that defense is so bad in Kansas City. So Jordan Love, 32.5 points. Dare I say, Matt Savoca, book it. And this is the only time I can get away with using a quarterback, right? Because it's Jordan Love. It's not like I could come in. Quarterbacks are easy to cheat with. So that's why.
You had two legitimate quarterback options that even Laffy, if you had seen our shows from earlier in the season, he wouldn't have been mad at those because, Jordan Love or Trevor Simeon.
Right.
Yeah, there's some boldness in there. Absolutely.
All right, let's go around as we wrap up here. Final couple of minutes. And again, click those links below before you hit the thumbs up and subscribe button. And then do that after you come back here from the 10 free dollars with Yahoo and the 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Let's wind down. I'll sneak one in before we get out, but really, you each have 2 here. Sneaky starts, and this is a great way to end the show as we do each and every week on this Friday, because we're giving people either another opportunity, if you came in late, and shame on you, to hear about a name that we're high on, or a chance to sneak in somebody who hasn't been mentioned for whatever reason, but is a great pivot or just opportunity to start. So, Tara, let's start with you. We'll go Tara, Matt, me, Tara, Matt, and then end.
Well, okay, I'm not gonna lie. You guys took all of the fantastic sneaky plays. Yeah. I agree with you guys, but since you got there first, I was like, okay, I'm gonna pivot a little. I'm gonna go double tight end. So my first tight end here is Evan Ingram. Quite frankly, someone has to catch the ball. Someone's got to do it. We have so many injury concerns in situations with the Giants. And even if some of these guys do end up playing, as we saw last week, just because they step on the field does not mean that mid-game they will not step off the field with these injuries. So, I think that there's a good chance here for Evan Ingram to be the one that takes the lead. We saw Slayton, he's probably the only truly healthy receiver out there. Last game, he had 2 targets, 0 receptions. I think the upside here, aside from Booker, obviously, is going to be with Evan Ingram. He finally found the end zone last week. Fantastic. I think we could possibly see positive things moving forward. He did not get traded. Maybe that was on his mind a little bit. So I think that this is a situation where the stars might be aligning for Evan Ingram to be very usable at the tight end position.
I like that call. Yeah. And one thing I've been doing too, even in season-long fantasy leagues, when I have my usual tight end, like say TJ Hawkinson is your tight end 1, and maybe you're starting Daniel Jones or something like that in a super flex league, or you're looking for that, correlate it with your quarterback and play that tight end with him, especially if it's a good matchup on its own. Really like that Ingram call. I'm going to go with one of the players who's becoming a full-time player on one of the most prolific offenses in the league, Van Jefferson, playing the Titans, 2 straight usable fantasy weeks, 4 for 43 and a touchdown against Detroit in week 7, 3 for 88 in week 8 against Houston. And now they're not Houston or Detroit level bad, but Tennessee is still 19th in defensive expected points added per play and 20th overall in defensive efficiency. So when you're talking about the Rams, who are 2nd in yards per pass attempt and leading the league in points scored per play, I'm very interested in a 6'2", 200-pound second-round pick who runs a 4.39 40 and clearly outplayed Deshaun Jackson to the point where he wanted no part of being on that team. He is that deep threat, that 4th option outside of Kupp, Woods, and Higbee. 80% of snaps on the most prolific offense in the league. Yes, sign me up, Van Jefferson.
I love that. Instead of going Brian Edwards as my sneaky start, I would add, because I know people play fantasy, they bet. We have an odds channel as well. You're going to get a great player prop for the next couple of weeks on Van Jefferson over longest receiving yards at like 16, 17 still, which is ridiculous because all you need is one grab for that. And again, I'll just sneak Brian Edwards in there. We know what happened with Ruggs. There still is going to be a need, a void to fill as far as going downfield. It's not going to be all Renfro. Edwards has a little bit more. All right, let's wind down here. One more each from both of you as the chat is eagerly anticipating. Tara, then Matt, you can squeeze in your final. Oh, no, you hit both, didn't you? No?
I mentioned this player before, but
Okay.
I'll go fast.
Yeah, that's fine. Both of you,
Yeah.
we have to end. No, you know what it was? You know what tripped me up is that Tara did a fantastic job of teasing that it was two tight ends. And now in my brain, it's warped because I'm holding this child here, that I thought you mentioned your other one. So, yes, Matt, you could go. And then, Tara, we can end on you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we're just going to bring up Rondale Moore here. The short area targets, especially if Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins out, is really the only place they're going to be able to go. Not saying Zach Ertz isn't a bad, or he is a good play this week, I should just say. But the passing game just is going to need to design and rely on quick, short targets, and that's where Rondale Moore exceeds. Right now, he's at 5.6 yards after the catch per target. That's wide receiver 11 in the NFL, and he's wide receiver 19 with 1.8 yards of separation at target. He's getting open. Backup quarterbacks love to throw to wide open receivers, and especially ones that can make things happen after the catch. That's Rondale Moore.
Yeah, you guys, as you guys can see, Rondale Moore, Brian Edwards, Van Jefferson, clearly they took all the good ones and left me talking about Evan Ingram and Dan Arnold. Dan Arnold,
Dan Arnold.
Yeah, I do too. He's been fantastic over the last few weeks as a spot start. In case you had your tight end one that was down, he seems to be getting more comfortable within this Jacksonville offense, and for whatever reason, the season-ending injury to Chark did not benefit anybody that we thought it would. It has actually benefited Jamal Agnew, who is also probably a sneaky play, Jamal Agnew and Dan Arnold. Last week, Dan Arnold was 8 of 10 for 68 yards. We did see a bad game by Mike Gesicki against Buffalo the prior week, but Tua was not afraid to target his receivers. I think Trevor Lawrence might be more inclined to reel it back and rely on his tight end. And so I think Dan Arnold could see another solid game.
I can tell you this. I don't know who's going to hit 30. I don't know the sneaky starts that are going to pay off or not. But Tara will be first on our sheet next week when it comes to naming sneaky starts and 30 plus. That I can guarantee you.
Nice. I like it.
All right. Well, we appreciate everybody hanging with us. Look, there were some questions out there, but these names did pop up. So hopefully we were able to help you. We have a full comprehensive look at the slate on Sunday. Myself, Notorious Fantasy, who shows up, of course, with like a minute to go in the show. Nick Lepre will be back on this channel leading up. Tons of content, VOD on here as well. So subscribe so you don't miss anything. At It's Terra Time on Twitter, at Draftaholic as well for both Tara and Matt, respectively. At Shander Show for me. Thanks to Chris for producing Yahoo as well. Have a great weekend.